Hello, my magnanimous pre-calculus class. We are ready for another online adventure. Today, we will discuss sum and difference formulas for tangent and cofunctions. Tangent and cofunctions. We have two formulas for tangent. We have the tangent sum of angle alpha plus beta is equal to tan of alpha plus tan of beta. Notice the plus sign here and the plus sign in the numerator here, but the sign is opposite in the denominator, so it's 1 minus the tan of alpha times the tan of beta. The tan difference, you see the difference of the two angles, tan of alpha minus beta. The minus sign is here, the minus sign is in the numerator here. Tan of alpha minus tan of beta over 1 plus. See, the sign in the denominator is opposite from the sign in the what? Numerator. 1 plus the tan of alpha times tan of beta. Well, let's look at an example. We're going to find the exact value of tan of pi over 6 plus pi over 4. Well, this is an addition, so it's going to be a tan of a sum of two angles. So it's going to be tan of alpha plus tan of beta over 1 minus tan of alpha times tan of beta. So here you see the alpha is pi over 6 and the beta is pi over 4. So wherever we see alpha over here, we're going to put pi over 6. Where we see beta here, we're going to put pi over 4. And then we can use our unit circle to help us find these values. So let's look at pi over 6. Well, here is pi over 6. Remember, the tan is the sine divided by the cosine. Remember, we said the shortcut, cover up the denominators. Then it's going to be the numerator of the sine divided by the numerator of the cosine. So it's going to be 1 over square root of 3, because remember that tan is what? Sine divided by what? The cosine. So that's where I'm getting 1 over square root of 3. And the tan of pi over 4, so let's find pi over 4 here. Here's pi over 4. If you cover up the denominators too, then the numerator of the sine is square root of 2 divided by the numerator of the cosine, square root of 2. Well, square root of 2 divided by square root of 2 is 1. So that's how we're getting a 1 here. So once we find out what the tan of pi over 6 is in the numerator and the tan of pi over 4 in the numerator here, they're going to be the same values here. So in the denominator, it's going to be 1 minus 1 over square root of 3 times 1. And when I multiply, I get again 1 over square root of 3 plus 1 in the numerator, and 1 minus 1 over square root of 3. Well, I want to get rid of this denominator here. I have a square root of 3 in the denominator here and here. So the least common denominator is simply square root of 3. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to multiply both terms in the numerator and both terms in the denominator by square root of 3. So it's 1 over square root of 3 times square root of 3. 1 times square root of 3. 1 times square root of 3 in the denominator. Negative 1 over square root of 3 times square root of 3 here. Well, the square root of 3's do what? Cancel out here. So we're left with a 1. When you multiply this, you get the square root of 3. Multiply these two terms, you get square root of 3. The square root of 3's cancel out here, so it's minus 1. And for me, you may leave your answer in this simplified form. You don't have to multiply by the conjugate of the denominator. Just leave it like this. It's more simple when we're doing this. And then if you want to check your answer to see if this is the same thing as this, remember you can go to your calculator. And if you go to your calculator, you're going to put the calculator in radian mode. And we do this, you get approximately this answer. But if you do this ratio, you're going to also get the very same thing. So that means that the exact value for tan of pi over 6 plus pi over 4 is equal to 1 plus the square root of 3 all over square root of 3 minus 1. That's just to check if you would like to do that. Next, let's work backwards just a little bit. Write the expression as tangent of an angle first, and then find the exact value. Exact value, means no fractions, no decimals, or fractions reduce to lowest terms, no decimals. So notice here in the numerator, there's a minus sign. So we should think about a tangent difference. You see the tangent difference here. So this is the alpha, and this is the beta. And we're going to have tan of pi over 5 minus pi over 30. And when we do that, when we do the subtraction, we want to subtract fractions when we have what like denominators. So the least common denominator is going to be 30. So when I multiply pi over 5 by 6 over 6, I get 6 pi over 30 minus pi over 30, which will give me 5 pi over 30, which reduces to pi over 6. So here I have the expression as the tangent of an angle, but then I want to find the exact value. So again, tan of pi over 6. We go to our unit circle again. Here's our pi over 6. Remember, it's sine divided by cosine. Cover up the denominators. Then it's going to be the numerator of the sine, which is 1, divided by the numerator of the cosine, which is square root of 3. So you can leave your answer like this. Or, since this is just a fraction, some students prefer just to go on and do what's rationalize the denominator. So either this answer or this answer, I will accept both answers when you're doing that. Okay, let's review just a little bit. From right triangle trigonometry, if the sum of two positive angles is pi over 2 radians, and remember pi over 2 radians is the same thing as what, 90 degrees. And you see that on our unit circle, you see pi over 2 radians, the same thing as what, 90 degrees. The two angles are complements. You know, the sum of two angles is 90 degrees. If the sum of two angles adds up to pi over 2, they are complements of each other. The sum of the two acute angles of a right triangle is pi over 2 radians, or 90 degrees. So they are complements of each other. They are complements of each other. That means that those two acute angles of a right triangle will add up to 90 degrees. And if one of the acute angles is labeled theta, then the other acute angle will have to be pi over 2 minus the theta, or 90 degrees what? Minus the theta. So that like sine and cosine, they're co-functions. This is found on page 578 in our ebook. And you see the co-function identities. The sine of theta is the same thing as the cosine of, you see, pi over 2 minus theta, or it's like what, 90 degrees minus theta. The secant of theta is the same thing as cosecant of what, the pi over 2 minus theta. Cosine of theta is sine of pi over 2 minus theta. Cosecant of theta is secant of pi over 2 minus theta. Tan of theta is cotan of pi over 2 minus theta. And cotan of theta is tan of pi over 2 minus theta. So these are what? Co-functions. The co stands for what? The co-functions. So let's look at an example. Here, the sine of pi over 6. Its co-function is the same thing as the cosine of pi over 2 minus pi over 6. Well, the LCD is 6. So pi over 2 is the same thing as 3 pi over 6 minus the 1 pi over 6, which gives us 2 pi over 6, which reduces to what? Pi over 3. So if you look at your unit circle, sine of pi over 6, the sine of pi over 6 is a half. And then the cosine of pi over 3, the cosine of pi over 3 is what? A half. And you see they are equal. So let's look at another example. Write the tan of pi over 9 in terms of its cofunction. Well, the tan of pi over 9 is the same thing as the cotangent of pi over 2 minus pi over 9. Well, the least common denominator for 2 and 9 will be 18. So this is 9 pi over 18 minus 2 pi over 18 gives us 7 pi over 18. So the tan of pi over 9 is the same thing as the cotan of 7 pi over 18. And remember, as you are watching this video, stop, rewind, review. Stop, rewind, review. My love goes out to you.